The cargo ship Star Wanderer shuddered as another solar flare struck its hull. In the cockpit, Jack gripped the controls tighter, his knuckles turning white. He wasn't supposed to be piloting today. This was just a routine cargo run with him as a backup pilot. But now, with the main crew dead in an electrical fire, he was the only human left aboard. Well, the only human. In the co-pilot's seat, the insectoid diplomat named Tech clicked their mandibles nervously. Their dark blue carapace reflected the warning lights that flashed across the cockpit. Neither of them should have been in this situation. The diplomat was supposed to be safely asleep in a cryopod, traveling to a peace conference. Engine 3 failing. The ship's computer announced in its emotionless voice. Hull breach detected in Cargo Bay 7. Structural integrity at 28%. Jack knew they wouldn't survive another direct hit. He glanced at the alien beside him, trying to read their expression. It was impossible. Their face was all angles and compound eyes. The translator box between them crackled with static as Tech spoke. Escape, pod. Now. The translation came through broken and harsh. Jack shook his head. We might still save. The ship lurched violently as another solar flare struck. Warning sirens blared, and red emergency lights bathed the cockpit in a bloody glow. The computer's voice became distorted. Critical failure imminent. All personnel proceed to escape pods. There was no choice now. Jack unstrapped himself and grabbed the emergency kit from under his seat. Tech was already moving, their 6-jointed legs carrying them swiftly toward the escape pod bay. They had drilled this during the pre-flight checks, but doing it for real, with death breathing down their necks, was different. The ship's corridor tilted as artificial gravity began to fail. Jack pushed off the walls, half running, half floating toward the escape pod. Ahead of him, Tech's antennae twitched wildly. Some kind of threat detection, since their species had. The alien chittered something, but the translator was left behind in the cockpit. They reached the last functioning escape pod, just as the ship's spine began to break. Metal screamed against metal. The pod's door hissed open, and they tumbled inside. Jack's trembling fingers found the launch controls as Tech secured the door. Hang on, Jack shouted, knowing Tech probably couldn't understand him. He pulled the launch lever. The pod shot away from the dying ship like a bullet from a gun. Through the small viewport, Jack watched the Star Wanderer break apart, its hull splitting like a cracked egg. The debris field spread out behind them, glittering in the light of the system's 3 suns. But they weren't safe yet. The pod's navigation system was basic, designed only for short-range survival. The nearest planet filled their viewport, a blue-green world that might have looked like Earth if not for the strange purple clouds swirling in its atmosphere. Gravitational pull exceeding safety parameters, the pod's computer warned. Brace for emergency landing procedures. The pod began to heat up as they hit the atmosphere. Jack checked the restraints on both his and Tech's crash webbing. The alien's compound eyes fixed on him, and for a moment, he thought he saw something like trust in that alien gaze. The ground rushed up to meet them. Jack caught glimpses of crystalline forests and strange rock formations before the pod hit. The impact threw them against their restraints. Metal crumpled, sparks flew, and emergency foam deployed around them. When the pod finally stopped rolling, Jack hung limply in his restraints, checking himself for injuries. Besides bruises and a cut on his forehead, he seemed intact. He looked over at Tech, who was already cutting themselves free with a sharp edge of their natural armor. Through the cracked viewport, they could see the alien landscape. The crystalline trees sparkled under the light of 3 suns. Something large moved in the distance, something that shouldn't have had that many legs. The pod's systems sparked and died, taking their last connection to civilization with them. Jack met Tech's gaze again, human and alien, stranded together on this deadly world. They couldn't even speak to each other now, but somehow they'd have to survive. A screech echoed from the crystal forest. Tech's antennae went rigid. Both of them knew that sound meant danger, even without words to say it. Their survival would depend on learning to understand each other, if they lived long enough to try. The purple clouds above turned dark and heavy. Jack watched as the first drops of rain hit the crystal trees, making a strange hissing sound. Steam rose where the droplets landed. His eyes widened as he realized what this meant. Acid rain. "We need shelter," he said, forgetting for a moment that Tech couldn't understand him. The alien was already moving, their antennae twitching frantically. They pointed at a dark opening in a nearby cliff face, a cave. They grabbed what supplies they could from the crashed pod. Jack took the emergency kit and some pieces of the pod's metal shell. Tech carried the remains of their diplomatic case and some electronic parts. The rain began to fall harder, and where it hit Jack's sleeve, it left tiny holes in the fabric. The cave entrance was narrow, but opened into a larger space inside. Crystal formations grew from the floor and ceiling, giving off a faint blue glow. It was beautiful, but Jack didn't trust anything on this planet yet. Tech moved deeper into the cave, their compound eyes better at seeing in the dim light. They stopped suddenly, making clicking sounds. Jack tensed, expecting danger. But the alien bent down and picked up something from the ground. It was a piece of torn fabric. Someone, or something, had been here before. The acid rain fell harder outside, creating a curtain of deadly water. The hissing grew louder, and a mist began to form where the rain hit the ground. Jack set up their makeshift camp while Tech explored the cave's entrance, seemingly studying the crystal formations. Night came quickly as two of the three suns set. The third sun, smaller and dimmer, cast long shadows through the acid rain. The temperature dropped sharply. Jack shivered and tried to start a small fire using pieces of his seat cushion and some emergency supplies. A loud screech came from outside, the same kind they'd heard earlier. This time it was closer. Tech's antennae went rigid again, and they made rapid clicking sounds. They'd moved their hands in a way that seemed to say, "Stay still." Jack held his breath. A shadow passed by the cave entrance, something big with too many legs, like a giant centipede. Its shell gleamed in the dim light of the last sun. They watched in silence as it moved past their hiding place. Once the creature was gone, Jack let out his breath. He looked at Tech and pointed to his chest. "Jack," he said clearly. Then he pointed at the alien. Tech seemed to understand. They touched their chest plate with one clawed hand and made a sound like wind through leaves. Tech. It was a start. Jack smiled and nodded. He picked up a broken piece of pod metal and drew in the dirt, a simple stick figure of a human. Then he pointed to himself again. Tech watched with interest and took the metal piece. They drew something that looked like their species, a figure with multiple legs and large eyes. Their simple drawing session was interrupted by another screech, this time from deeper in the cave. Both of them froze. Tech's antennae vibrated, and they pointed urgently toward a narrow side passage. Jack didn't understand why until he heard heavy footsteps approaching from the main tunnel. Without speaking, they squeezed into the side passage. Jack's heart pounded as something large moved through their former camping spot. Through a crack in the crystal wall, he could see another of the centipede creatures, but this one was even bigger. Tech's claw touched Jack's arm, and they pointed up. Above them, crystals had grown into a kind of natural ladder. Jack nodded, understanding. They climbed quietly, reaching a small ledge just as the creature below turned toward their hiding spot. They stayed perfectly still, pressed against the cave wall. Jack could feel Tech trembling slightly. It was the first sign that the alien could feel fear just like him. The creature below finally moved on, its many legs making scratching sounds against the cave floor. When it was safe, they looked at each other in the dim crystal light. Without words, both understood something important. They would only survive by trusting each other. As the last sun set and true darkness fell, they remained on the ledge, two survivors from different worlds, sharing their first night in an alien hell. Morning came with all three suns rising at different times, creating strange, shifting shadows in the crystal forest. Jack and Tech had survived their first night on the ledge, but their supplies wouldn't last long. They needed food and water. Tech pointed to their diplomatic case, pulled out a small device, and placed it on the ground. A holographic map appeared, showing their crash site and the surrounding area. They pointed to a blue spot about 2 miles away, perhaps a water source. Jack nodded and patted his nearly empty water bottle. He then pointed to his mouth and made an eating motion. Tech's antennae moved in what Jack was starting to recognize as agreement. They had to risk leaving their shelter. They climbed down carefully from their ledge. Jack tested the morning air. No acid rain, but the humidity made breathing feel strange. His throat itched. Tech noticed his discomfort and handed him a small breathing filter from their case. The gesture surprised him. It was their last one. Outside the cave, the crystal forest sparkled under the triple suns. Beautiful but deadly, like everything else on this planet. They moved carefully, with Tech's antenna constantly scanning for danger. Jack had learned to trust these warnings. They had saved them twice already. Halfway to the water source, Tech suddenly froze. Their antennae went completely still, a new warning sign. Jack stopped too, scanning the area. At first, he saw nothing. Then he noticed movement in the crystal trees ahead. They weren't trees at all. What they had thought were crystal trunks began to move, revealing themselves as tall, thin creatures with transparent bodies. A hunting pack, and Jack and Tech were surrounded. The creatures moved like liquid glass, beautiful and terrifying. One lunged at Jack, but Tech pulled him aside with surprising strength. Jack rolled and came up with a metal rod from their supplies. Tech's natural armor plates shifted, revealing small spikes, a defensive position. The first crystal hunter attacked again. Jack swung his rod, hitting it in what he hoped was its head. The creature shattered like ice, its pieces still moving. Tech fought off 2 more, their armor deflecting the creature's sharp edges. But more kept coming. Jack and Tech found themselves back to back, surrounded by living crystal. They moved together, as if they'd fought side by side before. When Jack stumbled, Tech caught him. When a hunter tried to flank Tech, Jack warned them with a touch. Then Tech made a series of rapid clicks and pointed to a large crystal formation nearby. Jack didn't understand the words, but he understood the plan. They ran toward it. The hunters closed behind. At the last moment, they split apart. The crystal hunters couldn't turn fast enough. They crashed into the formation and each other, shattering into thousands of pieces. The remaining hunters retreated, melting back into the forest. Breathing hard, Jack turned to Tech. The alien was injured. A small crack in their armor leaked a silvery fluid. Without thinking, Jack pulled out the emergency medical kit. Tech didn't pull away when he applied the sealing gel to their wound. They looked at each other, and something changed in that moment. Tech reached out and touched Jack's arm, where he'd been cut during the fight. Their antennae moved in a new pattern. Concern, Jack realized. They weren't just survival partners anymore. Using sticks in the dirt, they began to share. Jack drew Earth, with its single sun and moon. Tech drew their homeworld, with its ring of orbiting cities. They didn't need words to show pride in their homes, worry for their families, or their growing trust in each other. The third sun was setting when they finally reached the water source, a clear pool fed by underground springs. As they filtered water and searched for edible plants, Jack noticed Tech watching him with their compound eyes. The alien made a sound he hadn't heard before, almost like a human laugh. They had survived another day, learned to fight together, and begun to understand each other. On this deadly world, differences in species meant less than the willingness to protect each other. As they headed back to their cave, Jack realized that sometimes the best friendships start without any words at all. The 4th day on the deadly planet started with a tremor. Inside their cave shelter, crystals clinked together like wind chimes. Tech's antennae twitched rapidly, a warning sign Jack had learned to take seriously. They needed to move deeper into the cave. Jack gathered their few remaining supplies while Tech scouted ahead. The ground shook again, stronger this time. Small crystals began falling from the ceiling. Tech returned quickly, making urgent clicking sounds. They grabbed Jack's arm and pulled him toward the back of the cave. The tremors were getting worse. Larger crystals crashed down around them as they ran deeper into the tunnel. Then Jack heard it, the crack of stone splitting above them. He looked up just as a massive section of the crystal ceiling began to fall. Without hesitation, Tech shoved him forward and raised their armored back to shield them both. The crash was deafening. Crystal shards flew everywhere. When the dust settled, Jack found himself pressed against the cave wall, protected by Tech's body. But something was wrong. Tech wasn't moving. Tech. Jack's voice shook as he carefully shifted his friend's weight. Tech's normally bright blue carapace was dull and thick silver fluid. Their blood leaked from a deep crack in their armor. Several crystal shards had pierced the spaces between their protective plates. Jack's hands trembled as he opened their dwindling medical supplies. He knew human medicine, but alien biology. The wrong treatment could kill Tech faster than the wounds. Tech's compound eyes flickered weakly. They made a soft clicking sound and lifted one arm, pointing to their diplomatic case. Jack retrieved it quickly. Inside was a small medical kit with strange tools and containers marked in Tech's alien language. But which one to use? Jack spread them out, showing them to Tech. With shaking claws, Tech pointed to a purple cylinder and then to their wounds. They demonstrated a pulling motion. The shards had to come out first. Jack took a deep breath. "I'm sorry," he whispered, knowing Tech couldn't understand the words but hoping they would understand the tone. "This is going to hurt." He gripped the first crystal shard. Tech's antennae went rigid as he pulled it free. Silver blood welled up from the wound. Jack worked as quickly as he dared, removing each shard while trying to minimize the damage. Tech made no sound during the process, but their whole body trembled. When Jack removed the last shard, he saw something that stopped him cold. Tears, actual tears, leaking from behind Tech's compound eyes. They could cry, just like humans. Jack opened the purple cylinder. Inside was a thick gel that smelled like mint and copper. Following Tech's weak gestures, he applied it to each wound. The gel hardened quickly, sealing the injuries. Hours passed. Jack sat with Tech's head resting in his lap, watching their breathing slowly steady. He talked quietly, not caring that Tech couldn't understand the words. He told them about Earth, about his family, about his fear of dying alone on this alien world. To his surprise, Tech responded. They reached up with one claw and touched Jack's face, wiping away tears he hadn't realized he was shedding. Then they did something remarkable. They hummed, a soft vibrating sound that somehow conveyed comfort. As the tremors finally stopped and night fell, they stayed that way, human and alien, comforting each other in the darkness. Tech drew something in the dust beside them. Two figures, one human and one alien, with a simple mark between them that needed no translation. It meant family. Jack added to the drawing, showing both figures standing together beneath three suns. Tech's antennae moved in what he now knew was their version of a smile. They had crossed another boundary. No longer just allies or even friends, they had become something more. Family forged in crisis, transcending the barriers of species and language. As Tech drifted into healing sleep, Jack kept watch. Tomorrow they would face new dangers, but tonight had taught him something important. Emotions like fear, pain, and love were truly universal, bridging the gap between worlds better than any translator ever could. 2 days after Tech's injury, they ventured deeper into the cave system. Their food supplies were running low, and the acid rains outside had grown worse. They had to find another way out. Tech's wounds were healing well, their armor slowly repairing itself. They still moved carefully, but their antennae remained alert, scanning for danger. Jack walked close by, ready to help if needed. They had developed a kind of silent language, touches, gestures, and sounds that meant more than words ever could. The tunnel they followed sloped downward, crystal formations growing denser. Then Tech stopped suddenly, their antennae vibrating in a pattern Jack had never seen before. They pointed ahead, where the crystal wall seemed to shine differently. As they got closer, Jack realized what he was seeing. The wall wasn't natural, it was manufactured. Smooth panels of some strange metal peeked through the crystal growth. They had found something built by intelligent hands. Tech touched the wall, their claws making soft tapping sounds. They found a seam, then another. Jack joined in the search, brushing away crystal deposits. Together, they uncovered what looked like a door. But how to open it? There was no obvious handle or control panel. Tech studied the surface carefully, then pressed their hand against a particular spot. Nothing happened. They gestured for Jack to try the same place. The moment Jack's hand touched the metal, lines of light spread out from his fingers. The door shuddered, then split down the middle with a hiss of ancient machinery. They looked at each other in surprise. The door had responded to human DNA. Tech's antennae moved in what Jack now recognized as curiosity. They stepped through together. Inside was a large room filled with strange equipment. Most of it was covered in crystal growth, but some displays still glowed with faint light. This was some kind of research station, abandoned long ago. Tech moved to one of the active displays, their compound eyes reflecting the gentle blue glow. They made an excited clicking sound and waved Jack over. On the screen was a map, not just of the cave system, but of the entire region. And there, blinking steadily, was a symbol they both understood, a communication array. Hope surged through Jack's chest, a way to call for help. But as they studied the map more closely, his heart sank. The array was in another section of the ruins, and the path there crossed the crystal forest, right through the hunting grounds of those glass creatures. Then Tech found something else. They cleared crystal growth from another screen, revealing a power reading. The array was still functioning, drawing power from deep underground, but the power was failing. Soon, it would die completely. They had to try. Using the map, they planned a route. It would take them through the most dangerous part of the forest, but it was their only chance. Tech drew in the dust, a simple picture showing the three suns. They pointed to the smallest sun, then made a cutting motion. Jack understood. They had to go before the third sun set, when the glass hunters were most active. But as they gathered supplies for the journey, Jack noticed something on one of the screens. The power system was damaged. There would only be enough energy for one transmission, one signal to one location. They would have to choose, call for human help or contact Tech's people. Tech saw it too. Their antennae drooped. They understood the problem. They looked at Jack, then at the screen, then back at Jack. Slowly, they pointed to him, then to the communication controls. Jack shook his head. He pointed to Tech instead. They had saved his life. They deserved the chance to go home. They stood there, each trying to give the other the chance at rescue. In that moment, Jack realized how far they'd come from their first distrustful meeting. Now each was willing to sacrifice their own salvation for the other. Outside, the second sun began to set. They had to decide soon. But how do you choose between saving yourself or saving your friend, when that friend has become your only family on this deadly world? The crystal forest was deadly quiet as Jack and Tech made their way toward the communication array. The second sun had set, leaving only the smallest sun casting weird shadows through the transparent trees. They moved carefully, stopping whenever Tech's antennae signaled danger. Above them, dark purple clouds gathered. Another acid storm was coming. They had maybe an hour before the deadly rain would start falling. The communication array stood on a hill about half a mile away, its ancient metal frame stretching up toward the alien sky. Suddenly, Tech froze. Their antennae went completely still, the worst warning sign. Jack looked around and saw them. Glass hunters, at least 12, moving through the crystal trees. They were surrounded. They couldn't go back. The acid rain would trap them, and the ancient power system was failing. It was now or never. Jack pointed to a dense cluster of crystal formations ahead. If they could reach it, they might have a chance to break through to the array. Tech understood. They moved forward together, as silent as shadows. They were halfway there when the first hunter attacked. Tech spun, their armor deflecting the creature's crystal claws. Jack swung his metal rod, shattering another hunter that leaped at them. But more kept coming. "Run," Jack shouted, forgetting Tech couldn't understand the word. But they understood his push toward the array. They ran together, fighting through the glass hunters. Jack's arm was cut badly. Tech's newly healed armor cracked in places. The first drops of acid rain began to fall as they reached the array's base. The hunters backed off. Even they feared the rain. But the rain brought another problem. The array's metal was old, already corroding. They had minutes at most before it would be destroyed. Inside the control room, Jack worked frantically to power up the ancient system. His hands shook as he cleared crystal growth from the controls. Tech stood guard at the door, watching the acid rain dissolve everything it touched. The console hummed to life, but something was wrong. The power readings were even lower than before. Jack's heart sank as he realized the truth. They had enough power for an emergency signal, but only one person could stay in the protective field when it activated. The other would be exposed to the acid rain. Thunder cracked overhead. Through the window, they could see the rain eating through the array's support beams. In minutes, the whole structure would collapse. Jack started programming the signal to Tech's people. He had to force them to go. He owed them that much. But as he worked, pain shot through his side. One of the hunter's cuts was deeper than he'd thought. He stumbled, falling against the console. Tech caught him, their strong arms holding him up. Their compound eyes studied his wound, and their antennae drooped in a way that meant deep worry. Then, to Jack's surprise, they began operating the console themselves. But they weren't sending a signal to their people. They were programming coordinates for human space. Jack tried to stop them, but Tech gently pushed his hands away. They pointed to his wound, then to the sky, then touched his chest where his heart was. The meaning was clear. You'll die without proper medical care. Your people can help you better than mine can help me. The array groaned as another support beam gave way. Tech pushed Jack into the transmission area. When he tried to step out, they blocked his way. Their antennae touched his forehead, and gesture of deep affection in their culture. Jack's vision blurred with tears as the transmission sequence started. The last thing he saw was Tech operating the controls, acid rain beginning to leak through the ceiling. His friend looked up, their compound eyes meeting his one last time. Their antennae moved in what he now knew meant goodbye. The transmission field brightened to blinding white. As Jack felt himself starting to dematerialize, he reached out toward Tech, understanding at last that some bonds run deeper than blood, deeper than species, deeper than worlds. The white light took him, carrying with it a truth he'd never forget. The greatest acts of love are written not in words, but in sacrifice. The rescue ship's medical bay was too clean, too quiet. Jack sat on the edge of his bed, staring out at the stars, his partially healed wounds a constant reminder of what and who he had left behind. 3 days had passed since the human patrol ship had picked up his emergency signal. "We're getting strange readings," the ship's captain had told him that morning. "Another signal, very weak, coming from the same planet. But it's not in any language we recognize." Jack's heart leaped. He knew exactly what it was. Despite everything, despite the acid rain and failing systems, Tech had somehow managed to send a second signal. They were alive. "Turn the ship around," Jack demanded, his voice hoarse with emotion. When the captain hesitated, Jack showed them the drawings he'd kept, the simple pictures he and Tech had used to communicate. He told their story of survival, friendship, and sacrifice. The captain listened, then nodded slowly. It'll take 12 hours to return. The storm season has made the planet almost impossible to approach. Those 12 hours were the longest of Jack's life. He stood on the bridge, watching as the deadly planet came back into view. Its 3 suns cast strange shadows across the purple clouds. Somewhere down there was his friend. The ship's sensors found the communication array, or what was left of it. Acid rain had eaten through most of the structure. But there, in the caves nearby, they detected movement. A life form, still alive. Landing was impossible in the storms. They would have to use the emergency dropship, a small craft designed to handle extreme conditions. Jack insisted on going with the rescue team. "That's my family down there," he said simply. The rescue team looked at his determination and didn't argue. The dropship fought through the acid rain, its special shields barely holding. They landed near the cave entrance Jack remembered so well. He was the first one out, wearing a protective suit. The cave looked different. Parts had collapsed, and new crystal formations had grown. But Jack knew the way. He led the team deeper, following the path he and Tech had taken so many times. They found them in the ancient research station. Tech was huddled near one of the old consoles, their armor badly damaged by the acid rain. But when they saw Jack, their antennae moved in that familiar way that meant joy. Jack ran forward, dropping to his knees beside his friend. Tech's clawed hand reached out, touching his chest where his heart was, their old gesture of connection. They were weak but alive. The rescue team moved quickly, carefully helping Tech into a special transport pod. Back on the main ship, the medical team was amazed. Tech had survived by using the ancient station's remaining power to create a small protective field, rationing it minute by minute until help arrived. During Tech's recovery, Jack rarely left their side. He helped the medical team understand Tech's biology using everything he'd learned while treating their wounds on the planet. When Tech was strong enough, they began teaching the humans their language, starting with the simple signs they'd created together. 2 weeks later, a diplomatic ship arrived. A joint mission of both human and Tech species. The story of their survival had reached both governments. They wanted to understand how 2 different species had overcome every barrier to keep each other alive. Tech, now fully recovered, stood with Jack as they told their story. They didn't need translators anymore. They had their own language, born of survival and deepened by trust. When asked if they wanted to return to their respective worlds, both gave the same answer. They would go together, or not at all. In the end, they became the first members of a new diplomatic corps, dedicated to helping humans and aliens understand each other. Their story was taught in schools on both worlds, a reminder that the strongest bonds can form in the hardest places. Years later, Jack returned to that deadly planet with Tech, now in a properly shielded research vessel. The crystal forests still gleamed under the 3 suns, the glass hunters still prowled, and the acid rain still fell. But now it wasn't a place of fear. It was the place where they had discovered that friendship knows no bounds, that family isn't about species, and that the universe's greatest gifts often come in the most unexpected forms. "Home," Tech said in carefully learned human speech, touching Jack's shoulder as they looked down at the planet. "Home," Jack agreed, his other hand reaching up to touch Tech's antenna in their species' gesture of family. Because sometimes, home isn't a place. It's the ones who would sacrifice everything to keep you alive.